So, hello everybody. It's good to be in Nebraska. So I have to tell you, it's an honor to be able to be here and have the opportunity to address you. But I also have to note that the level of kind of leadership and level of leadership, the commitment of leadership that I just saw is quite extraordinary. Now, I do a lot of speaking around the country. I know I've been in every state in the country speaking. And I'm in front of a lot of audiences with a dais like this, with a group of leaders. And I think this is the first time I've ever said that I'd like to clone this group and just put you in my pocket and take me with me as I go around the country. It was a demonstration of commitment across areas of government and levels of government that was quite extraordinary. So a round of applause for your leadership, because that is just something I don't see very often as I travel. I also want to say hello to my friends and colleagues. Corey and I go a long way back, but the truth of the matter is that starting in probably 8-9 years ago at Georgetown, but before that, both in my tenure at the U.S. Department of Justice at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and then at the Child Welfare League, Nebraska has been a core partner in the work that I've undertaken, whether it be on the juvenile justice issues at DOJ, on the child welfare issues at the Child Welfare League, or the blended integration work we're doing now at Georgetown. You have been there as an integral partner in how we've looked at and tried to develop new approaches to the work. And most recently at Georgetown, since 2009, you have sent 6 teams to our intensive learning certificate programs, and you have 31 fellows from Nebraska that have been to those programs, completed their capstone projects, and moved forward with doing really strong evidence-based work. And I know a number of them are in this room. I know that because my staff sent me a list of every one of them, and I've seen a bunch of you already today. But kudos to you for the commitment that you show to excellence in the work that you do every day across disciplines here in the state. This is an incredible commitment, and I want to honor it and thank you as I move forward with my comments. This is an exciting time, and I think Corey tried to foreshadow that while a lot of the comments you heard in the opening panel were about child welfare, that my comments were going to focus more directly on juvenile justice related issues, or how we move forward in juvenile justice from more of an integration standpoint. So it's an exciting time in juvenile justice in this country. For 3 decades, we've been building what I see, or what I call, the infrastructure of an evidence-based decision-making platform in our work. And we are now really at the culmination of that work, resulting in our ability to be much more effective in our work with youth involved in the juvenile justice system. Indeed, we are moving in a new direction based upon this research and resulting body of knowledge. So let me paint that picture for you of what that new direction begins to look like. One, I think we moved from where we were 20 or 30 years ago, maybe even more recently, operating in silos, independent of one another, to using more of a platform of multi-systems coordination. So we see that really as an underpinning now as we think about our work. Second, we really, if we go back into the 80s and early 90s, had a lack of research-based frameworks to guide our decision-making processes. And now we've seen that work move towards approaches based upon risk, on need, and responsivity. Third, we had seen the overuse of detention and incarceration of young people who really did not present the kind of high risk that needed to be put into that posture. And instead, we're seeing a better balance and use of community-based services along with, when appropriate, incarceration. We have moved from a lack of research on what works to a more effective and evidence-based programming model that we see rising up all over the country, let alone here in Nebraska. And fifth, we have moved more from a deficit-based approach in how we think about working with young people and their families to one that is more strength-based. And I think everything I just said, if you think about the comments you heard from your leaders in opening this conference, is reflected in what they talked about in terms of where Nebraska is going or already is and how the work is proceeding. So how did we get here, and what are the implications for the future? This evolution of our work can be traced back to the late 1980s and early 1990s when we saw two parallel developments in the field. One, a growing focus on evidence-based programs, something we call EBPs in shorthand. And second, the growth of the systems of care body of work in mental health, focusing on a more family-centered, strength-based approach in working with families. This new case management approach, more of a wraparound teaming engagement model, remains with us today and is acknowledged really as a best practice. One we see becoming part of our work in not only juvenile justice but also child welfare. We also saw the development in the late 1990s and early 2000s of the creation and use of more dynamic risk and needs assessment tools, instruments designed to help to inform decisions around detention and case disposition in juvenile justice. This movement towards structured decision-making tools has been profound nationally as well as here in the state of Nebraska, introducing objective tools and information that we can combine with the expertise of our workforce in making decisions. This includes structured decision-making tools such as dispositional matrices. And last but not least, we are seeing the development of tools such as the Standardized Program Evaluation Protocol to help us ensure that the services we provide reflect the evidence of what is effective. So let me go back to my initial premise that the juvenile justice system cannot do this work effectively alone. Indeed, there is an increased recognition that juvenile justice agencies and their partners must collaborate, including but not limited to educators, behavioral health, child welfare, the judiciary, law enforcement, attorneys, community-based organizations, as well as the families and young people themselves with whom we work. That we need to move more towards a model where we view them as our partners as well. This is important for us to take on as an issue in terms of how we bring these systems together. Some of you have heard me speak before, so I risk telling the story as one you may have heard, but I'm going to repeat it for those of you who have not heard it before, because it comes from a different field, but it reflects what happens when we don't bring our work together in a more effective way. And it comes from a speech that a professor was making around the assumption of risk and how we decide to assume risk in our day-to-day lives. The lecturer asked for a volunteer to come from the audience forward to answer 3 hypothetical questions. These were the questions that were asked. 1, assume I have a steel I-beam, construction I-beam, on the floor in front of the podium. It's 15 feet wide, long, 6 inches wide, 6 inches high. And assume that I am asking you to assume the risk of walking across that I-beam on the floor in front of the podium. And if you assume that risk, I'll pay you $25. The volunteer says, well, that's an easy hypothetical. Sure, I assume the risk, I'll easily take your $25. Hypothetical number 2. Assume now it's a 30-foot long I-beam, still 6 inches wide and 6 inches high. And assume now, instead of in front of the podium, I have it stretched across a gorge. And that gorge drops 300 feet into a bed of rocks. Now I'm going to offer you $50 to walk across that I-beam. Will you assume the risk? And the volunteer quickly acknowledged, no way I assume that risk for $50. So the lecturer says, third and final hypothetical. Assume now I've got the same I-beam, same gorge, except this time I'm on one side of the gorge and you are on the other. And on my side of the gorge, I've got one of your kids. And I'm holding that child by the hand over the edge of the gorge. And unless you come across, I will drop your child into that gorge. I'm offering you now $100 to come across the I-beam. Volunteer pauses for a second, says, can I ask you a question? Lecturer, a little bit surprised, says, sure. And the volunteer says, which one of my kids do you have? So, I can tell by the laughter that you either have one of those kids or you were one of those kids earlier in your life. But I tell the story because it reflects the fact that, one, at a base level, there is no adult in this room who would not somehow get across that I-beam to grab the hand of that child. It's just what we do. But as a system, as a set of systems, we are kind of making that benign decision every day. And if we don't do the extraordinary walking across that avenue, figuring how we are going to bring our systems work together to more effectively meet the needs of our young people, we in essence let them drop. Maybe not into a gorge to some fatal outcome, but to some negative outcome that we could otherwise prevent if we brought our work together in a different way. And if we think about the population we serve, the ones that need that hand to be lifted up, it is generally our more disadvantaged population. And if we disaggregate within that disadvantaged population, we'll find that more than likely, at a higher probability, these are our youth of color as well. So we really have a challenge in front of us. If we are going to lift all children up, if we're going to do our work more through the eyes of the child, we need to understand how we need to reframe our work and do our work in a different manner in order to get to those better outcomes. So the science, and there is a science behind this, is Bronfenbrenner's theory of social ecology. That youth nest within multiple settings that impact their behavior. Their families, their peer groups, their schools, their communities, and then within their own individual characteristics. And the implications of this framework for the juvenile justice system are profound. For example, interagency collaboration is not optional, it is a necessity. 2, interagency collaboration needs to include those core partners that were talked about up on the dais earlier: child welfare, education, behavioral health, as well as those positive youth development organizations that are embedded in the community that could also be that hand lifting a child up when a system necessarily isn't there. We need to prioritize early identification within this framework and early intervention after delinquency occurs, and emphasize long-term connections, permanency, family engagement, and self-sufficiency for these young people. This body of science also helped us identify common traits of effective system interventions: responding to identified risk and need, addressing criminogenic factors, addressing family, school, community, and peer dynamics, connecting youth to appropriate services with the correct dosage in the correct setting through, for example, structured decision making, and applying them in community as well as residential settings. In fact, in recent years, juvenile justice professionals have recognized the research that shows that we are more likely to achieve positive youth outcomes and reduce recidivism if decisions regarding services and placement for court-involved youth are based upon 1, the youth's level or level of risk for reoffending; 2, the factors that play a role in the youth's offending, also referenced as criminogenic needs. As many in this room know, this has been broken down into 3 categories of focus. The risk principle. Supervision and services should be focused on the youth most likely to reoffend. Second, the need principle. Services should address the youth's criminogenic needs or dynamic risk factors. That is, those factors that have been shown in the research to be associated with delinquency. For example, negative peer groups, antisocial attitudes, substance abuse, poor academic performance, as well as negative family dynamics. And then last but not least, the responsivity principle. Services should help youth overcome barriers to learning, improving behavior, and responding to treatment, for example, mental health, motivation, and cognitive functioning. Saying that we're going to treat a child in a program and not understanding the barriers that might be there that will interrupt our ability to be effective misses this final component of responsivity. Trying to work through issues around school or family with a young person who is mentally ill is not going to be successful. Only if we bring those partners together to figure out how to deliver that full range of services do we ultimately find success. Which brings me back to those objectives, those objective risk and needs assessment tools. Tools that estimate the likelihood of continued delinquent behavior without intervention and identify the factors driving the youth to delinquency. Tools that must be validated, that is proven to be accurately predicting what is intended to be predicted. And third, tools that must be standardized, that is implemented consistently and with fidelity by the workforce within your agencies, but allow for professional overrides in isolated and relatively infrequent situations. Now, I know that we've been doing assessments for kids for probably 4 decades now. But we have not really had this set of 4th generation risk and needs assessment tools that we use now that can really help us understand the balance between risk to reoffend and the needs that we need to treat for that particular child. And when we use those tools with fidelity, it has been shown that the predictive reliability of our recommendations around case disposition in the context of recidivism is 3 times likely to be more effective, more accurate. 3 times more likely. So this is a big challenge for our field. Historically, we have, and I watched this as a prosecutor working with our Department of Youth Services in Miami and in Florida, where workers would say, well, I've been doing this work for 20 years. I really have a good understanding of the young people I serve. I really feel like I can make a good assessment of the child's risk to reoffend and the things that they need to be successful and not to recidivate. And I'm not arguing that's not true. But the use of the objective tools adds to that expertise and allows us to refine at a much higher level that predictive reliability of what we're recommending to a judge, for example, in terms of a case disposition. And what is worthy of note, if you think about it, and what I was listing in terms of those criminogenic domains, they mirror the settings of the nesting theory of risk and protection that Bronfenbrenner identified nearly 4 or 5 decades ago, 1979. Prior and current offenses, education, substance use, family, personality and behavior, peers, leisure recreation, and attitudes and orientation. So what do we do with this information? Across the United States, systems use risk and needs assessment information to drive dispositional, placement, and service decisions, case planning by the caseworkers involved in the case, and then the graduated responses that we want to see if the child is not doing well. But we are also getting more sophisticated in this process, as a number of researchers and agency leaders are matching supervision and services using what's called a dispositional matrix. This is a case planning and dispositional recommendation tool developed based on historical case information, offense type, risk level, and recidivism. It creates a range of preferred levels of supervision and types of services to be recommended for youth at disposition. It provides opportunity to track the rate at which recommendations are followed and recidivism rates for that preferred option, as well as the court order disposition if they differ. It is a tool that can be validated. It can help us understand how to really identify that sweet spot between level of supervision and type of service that indeed maximizes recidivism reduction. Now, after my speech today, I'm going to ask the conference sponsors to post on the conference website a PowerPoint that a lot of these comments are taken from, because I think you'll find it interesting, the actual use of a dispositional matrix, how it lays out, and then the outcomes that we can achieve. So the significance of the development of this kind of tool cannot be overstated, as with adequate historical and prospective data, we can examine what occurs in terms of recidivism. So when we hit that sweet spot, and I've said it twice now, of the right level of supervision and type of service, as compared to under or overdosing a youth, we maximize the recidivism reduction. So let me play this out in terms of data. One of the states, there are a number of states who have identified and developed these tools. It's something I hope, as the work in juvenile justice in Nebraska proceeds, is something Nebraska can also develop in its toolkit. When a court ordered disposition within the recommended range of supervision level and service, the recidivism rate in the state of Florida across all risk levels was 21%. When the court deviated up and what I'm calling overdosed the child by creating too high a level of supervision or placement when the department was recommending community supervision, recidivism jumped to 34%. So that's a 13% increase over a base of 21. That's more than a 50% increase in recidivism. But even more importantly, when the court underdosed or the county attorney underdosed, the recidivism rate went up to 53%. So how we figure out, with the expertise of a worker and the use of objective tools, how we can identify the right level of supervision, the right kind of service, that's when we end up with the good results we want for all the young people that we come in contact with. Which brings me to my last key development in juvenile justice policy and practice over the past 3 decades. The use of evidence-based programs shown through current scientific research to lead to a reduction in recidivism. Now, the programs that are typically known are the high-profile programs. In fact, you're going to have a session at the conference today highlighting one of these programs, if not more, around MST. But normally they're certified by a national body, such as the Blueprints for Violence Prevention, or OJJDP at the U.S. Department of Justice's Model Program Guide, or the National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices, NREPP. These are classic name brand programs. So functional family therapy, as I said, multi-systemic therapy, multidimensional treatment foster care, aggression replacement training. In fact, some will be highlighted not only at this conference, but at other conferences all over this country this year. This is where we have gone with our work, and it really has elevated the quality of practice in this country. However, brand name evidence-based programs are not the only solution. Homegrown programs can also be evidence-based programs if grounded in research on what works, implemented with fidelity, and evaluated for effectiveness. I once was invited to a judicial retreat in Delaware, and the whole purpose of the retreat was the dilemma that the state was facing, because the judges had been so convinced that the only programs kids should go to are those name brand programs, that when the local caseworkers were recommending programs that were those homegrown, they would put a child on a waiting list to get into the name brand program rather than default back to the homegrown program, even though the data was showing effectiveness for those homegrown programs as well. So what matters in designing and implementing these types of programs or effective programs, including homegrown programs? One is the program type. Therapeutic approaches work, skill building, counseling, whereas programs emphasizing control or fear have small or negative effects on recidivism. Boot camps, prison visitation programs, there's a whole body of research around these. Second, service quantity and quality matter. Duration and total hours of service. We know from all that research what kind of dosage is best in a particular type of program. So one of the things we need to do is to make sure that these homegrown programs are also manualized and that they're delivering that right kind of dosage, the number of sessions that are effective in working with young people. That there are protocols associated with the programs, training and monitoring of service delivery, as well as high quality implementation. So the quality assurance that we need to have. And then third but not least is based upon my prior addressing of the over and under dosing, is targeting the youth's risk level. We have larger effects obviously with high risk youth, but we need to make sure we don't under or overdose a child, meaning not to underdose a high risk child and not to overdose a low risk child. That this information is important and needs to guide our work. So at the core of this new development of work, and this is not to denigrate those name brand programs. We need to have them, we need to use them, but we also need to know how we can more effectively assess those homegrown programs. And the tool we're using is the Standardized Program Evaluation Protocol, also abbreviated as the SPEP. It's a tool to assess programs for youth regarding their expected effectiveness to reduce recidivism. Developed by Dr. Mark Lipsey, the director of the Peabody Institute at Vanderbilt, this has been implemented now in 9 sites around the United States: Arizona, Connecticut, Florida, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Iowa, Milwaukee County, North Carolina, and Georgia. It is designed to help states improve outcomes for youth by translating what works into daily practice. So if you link these pieces together, if you tie them all together, which is what I'm really here to talk about, you make sure you have strong, reliable risk and needs assessment. You make sure you're using structured decision-making tools to best match a youth to the appropriate level of supervision and type of service. And then you make sure that there is quality assurance around the services being matched to those young people. If we do that, we have the evidence-based decision-making platform that I think is the future of juvenile justice in this country. The good news is that I believe Nebraska is on the precipice of pulling these pieces together, and a committed leadership that is trying to do so. So let me reiterate the pieces for me. 1, committed leadership. I stated that. 2, policies and practices, a growing body of policies and practices being posited here in Nebraska. Training of staff as to what this practice needs to look like. Performance measurement and evaluation, and last but not least, that quality assurance. The end result of this is youth in this state that come into contact with the juvenile justice system being much more likely to benefit from that contact and move forward in their lives with hope and real opportunity for the future. That's what you all are about. That's what this conference is about. That's what the push towards bringing child welfare and juvenile justice more together is about. It's about introducing concepts of hope and opportunity, and I might say love, back into the lives of kids who have lost hope for their future. So thank you for all that you do. I hope you have a wonderful conference. And again, it's an honor to be with you today. Thank you.